This is Special Prosecutor Larry Klayman.
I'm the only lawyer ever to obtain a court ruling that a president of the United States committed a crime.
For truth, for competition.
As a young lawyer, I helped break up AT&T. That's why you have all your cell phones today.
For sovereignty, for the Republic.
I'm the guy who at Judicial Watch, which I founded, uncovered the Chinagate scandal. Millions of dollars going to the Clinton campaign, corrupting our political system.
For the privacy of citizens.
And I'm the only guy to have enjoined the National Security Agency from mass surveillance on hundreds of millions of Americans.
Tearing it up.
I'm the son of meat packers in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I know how to slice and dice.
Bringing it back.
We're going to take this country apart and put it back together again in the way envisioned by our founding fathers.
It's not just talk.
We're not just regurgitating news stories. Larry Klayman, special prosecutor, is making the news.
And now, here's Larry.
Welcome to this week's edition of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman, a very important show. A lot of things have been happening. Robert Mueller, the special counsel, smells blood. The congressional committees smell blood. They smell the blood of the president. These people are not friendly to President Donald J. Trump, not even the Senate Intelligence Committee run by the chairman, Richard Burr, Republican of North Carolina, ranking minority member, Mark Warner of Virginia. They're all closing in on him. And why is that? And then I'm going to get to what's been happening. We had the testimony earlier this week of the Attorney General designate, William Barr. We can call him Bill Barr. He wasted no time within a few seconds of effusively praising Special Counsel Robert Mueller, claiming that he's been a friend of 30 years, that he won't curtail the investigation, that there's no witch hunt, and that it would take a lot for anything to happen with regard to him taking action against Mueller. Consequently, this was a green light for Mueller to proceed. And the president, reportedly, who was watching the confirmation hearings, was caught by surprise. You can assume that perhaps William Barr had told him that he was friendly with Mueller, but not to the extent that Bill Barr testified. And this is a problem. And I have been maintaining, and I wrote a column last week. You can find it at freedomwatchusa.org. I recommended that that nomination be pulled, that Bob Barr, someone I've worked with, who's going to be on later in this show, is the person to have as Attorney General. He's independent. I worked with him when we introduced articles of impeachment against Bill Clinton in the late 90s. I worked with him on various other matters. He, in fact, introduced an impeachment report that I had prepared at Judicial Watch, which dealt with matters far beyond Monica Lewinsky. It went into the Chinagate scandal, the Travelgate scandal, the Filegate scandal, misuse of the Internal Revenue Service. He's somebody who, frankly, would police Robert Mueller and make sure things are going as planned and as properly should occur under his mandate and under our law and under our Constitution, but not this guy, Bill Barr. Bill Barr is establishment Republican. He was Attorney General for 2 years under President H.W. Bush, the Big Daddy. And he was a former CIA agent, and he was also head of the criminal division in the Justice Department. He is pure establishment. And if the president got himself into this fix by, again, drinking the Kool-Aid of the Republican establishment. Now, we know he's busy. We know that he's preoccupied. We know that he's under attack. And it's understandable that he can make mistakes. But he made a huge mistake with this one. And then why else is Robert Mueller and the Senate Intelligence Committee and the House Intelligence Committee and all these other committees that are pursuing the president, Democrat and Republican controlled in both chambers, why are they now emboldened? For another lawyer who represents President Trump, Rudy Giuliani. Now, Rudy's a nice guy. I know Rudy Giuliani. I've talked to him. But as I've said before, he's past his prime. And it's been reported that he has a few drinks before he goes on TV. He smokes a cigar. He wants to be a big shot. He thinks it's all about him, something that's going to be the crowning achievement of his career in defending President Donald Trump. But he goes on TV this week, and he's asked a question as to whether or not there are others in the Trump campaign that colluded with Russia. He was referring, of course, to Manafort, where it was allegedly revealed that Manafort had shared polling data with some Russian interests. Now, even if that happened, that's not illegal. But they're using that, the left, and those in the Republican establishment, the rhinos, the deep swamp in both parties, to stick it to the president, to try to get the president impeached and possibly removed so they can run their establishment candidates for president in 2020. And it's not just the Democrats, it's the Republicans as well. People like Karl Rove would like nothing better than to have their candidate inserted in the presidency. You've got Mitt Romney, who was just elected senator after the president endorsed him. He double-crossed him within minutes and humiliated the president and told him he was unfit for office, in effect. So this is the dynamic. But Giuliani goes on, and in responding to a question whether the Trump campaign had colluded with Russia, he says, I don't know whether they have or they haven't. There may be people in there that did. That's in effect what he was saying. Of course, he had said the exact opposite months earlier, many, many times. I mean, the guy is just a loose cannon. He can't control what he's doing. And President Trump needs more than television lawyers to represent him. And that's all he's had. Television lawyers that want to get their face on TV, that want to make themselves even more famous, that are raking in the cash on the side, undoubtedly. And the president's being sold down the river. And of course, just last Friday, there were revelations that Michael Cohen was going to appear in front of Congress and testify that President Trump had ordered him to lie about the Trump's enterprises, their companies' dealings in trying to put up a hotel in Moscow, lie in front of a congressional committee. Now, that came out through BuzzFeed, which is ultra-leftist. It came out undoubtedly because the sleaziest lawyer in Washington, D.C., and I've come up against him and I sued him during the Clinton years, Lanny Davis, has become Michael Cohen's lawyer. Michael Cohen was led down the primrose path by Lanny Davis to harm the president, to have him impeached and ultimately removed. Lanny Davis, the former classmate of Bill and Hillary Clinton at Yale Law School, someone who ran interference for Bill Clinton during his administration, somebody who I was up against many times, someone who goes on TV and tries to pretend he's even-handed, but he's not. He is as sleazy as you come. And this is the person who led Cohen down the primrose path, wound up getting him criminally charged, didn't even get a cooperation agreement for him. And Cohen, who was probably the dumbest lawyer ever to come out of law school, simply a bagman, that's all he ever was, listens to this advice and he thinks that he's going to be a hero and get a smaller amount of time, and he will get time for everything he's done because of this. So this is the situation that we find ourselves in. So no sooner than all this stuff came out, the stepson of my valiant and patriotic client, Jerry Corsi, is subpoenaed to testify before the Mueller grand jury. That's going to happen next week on Thursday at 9:30 a.m. I'll be representing him there with my co-counsel, David Gray. And then we also have, and this was just received yesterday, a subpoena from the Senate Intelligence Committee, which is talking about having Mr. Corsi, Dr. Corsi, appear in front of them. Now, again, who runs that committee? Establishment Republican hack Richard Burr from North Carolina and his Bobsy twin, Mark Warner from Virginia. They all want to do a number on the president. They want their establishment candidates in. North Carolina, of course, is becoming more and more Democrat. It's where I went to school at Duke University. It's no longer the conservative state it used to be. And of course, you've got the House Intel Committee on the horizon, House Judiciary Committee. God knows what they're going to pull. The only answer to all of this is to be on the offense. And Jerry Corsi is on the offense. And I urge you to go to CorsiNation.com, donate to his legal defense fund, go to LarryKlayman.com, see what we're doing. See what we're doing at Freedom Watch, because we're pushing back with citizens' grand juries and other hard-hitting cases. Donate to Freedom Watch at freedomwatchusa.org. This is the state that we now find ourselves in. We are under attack. Our president is about ready to be sent to the guillotines. I mean, he already is long on his way. Impeachment now is an inevitability. There's no question about that. Nancy Pelosi is obstructing everything that the American people want in terms of the House of Representatives. She's even canceling the State of the Union message. Of course, it'll probably happen in the Senate chambers. And we are, frankly, we have entered into a revolution. That's where we are. I'm going to talk more about this later in our show, but I want you to pay close attention because on top of all of this legal deceit, for lack of a better word, for this tyranny that's being perpetrated by our government, are establishment judges that are rubber stamping what Mueller and the others want. And you also have a leftist media, which is furthering this. Of course, BuzzFeed, is the one that allegedly disclosed that Trump told Michael Cohen to lie about connections with Moscow and building a Trump Tower there. And then on top of that, you have these violent groups on the left, Antifa, Black Lives Matter. They're all out there sharpening their knives. We are headed into what appears to be, and I want to head it off, and I'm doing my best, a violent revolution. And it's time that the American people read the Constitution carefully, prepare for their self-defense. We have a right to bear arms. We have a right to commission militias, to join militias. We do not want to be the one that starts it, and we do not want to provoke violence. But we want to be prepared in our own self-defense because I'm afraid that this country is coming unglued at the seams, and the predictions of Thomas Jefferson will ring true, who said that when the people fear the government, there's tyranny, but when the government fears the people, there's liberty. He predicted a revolution every other generation, and we have to prepare for that. So read the Second Amendment carefully. We're doing all we can in the courts, peacefully and legally. But if it comes to that, we have to be prepared for self-defense. I'll be right back with the second segment of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. Until then, go to our website, freedomwatchusa.org, and contribute to our just cause.
Dangerous.
Don't care. Use the court and the law.
Lethal.
This is bad.
Special Prosecutor
Very bad.
Larry Klayman.
If you'd like to support Freedom Watch and this radio show, go to freedomwatchusa.org.
I'm back with my good friend, my colleague, my fellow patriot, Bob Barr, that we've had on the radio show many times. Bob is a real gentleman. Maybe I'm less of a gentleman, for lack of a better word. He's a great person, and Bob was a former U.S. attorney from the Northern District of Georgia. He was also a congressman, and I just want to get his take. I've come on strong with regard to William Barr. I didn't think it was right for him to immediately basically undercut the president, saying that Mueller's not conducting a witch hunt. I don't think it was right for him to effusively praise Bob Mueller, Bob. I mean, if you call him Bill Barr and then there's Bob Mueller, I guess we have Billy Bob at the same time. It seemed like they were joined at the hip. And I didn't think it was right to say that he was unlikely, to question what Mueller is doing. I mean, that's the impression that he gave. And that created a green light, as I've said in the earlier segment, for Mueller to come on strong with my client, Jerome Corsi, and others to continue this witch hunt. Yes, it is a witch hunt. I don't care what William Barr or Bill Barr, whatever you want to call him, said. And it gave a green light for the stepson of Dr. Corsi to be called in front of the Mueller grand jury next week, as well as to our then receiving a subpoena from the Senate Intel Committee. They smell blood. They smell that the president is weakened and the Republican establishment is cutting loose from the president. So I want, without talking about Bill Barr, because Bob knows him quite well, and of course, he's too much of a gentleman. I've endorsed Bob to become Attorney General for the president to pull the nomination of Bill Barr. I don't want to put him in between on that. But we need somebody who is independent. We need somebody who's fearless. And in my view, we don't need an establishment individual in there at this time when we have to clean up the Justice Department, return the rule of law to our alma mater, and restore some confidence in the American people that, in fact, our rule of law will be obeyed in this country. We don't have a dual system of justice. So I want to bring Bob in right now. Bob, give us your take on the Republican establishment, where you think they're headed, if you think they're going to stab the president in the back, if you think that they would like to run their establishment candidate in 2020. They've never liked him. They undercut him at every turn. Give us your thoughts on Lindsey Graham as head of the Judiciary Committee, and then we'll move on to other subjects because you're extremely knowledgeable about this type of thing, and you've lived it, having been a congressman during the Clinton years.
Well, thank you, Larry. It's always great to be on your show, and I very much appreciate what you do to keep the focus of the American people insofar as you reach them, and you reach an awful lot of people through your work, to keep their focus on the substance of the rule of law, the substance of the Constitution, and what it really means. I share your concern with the special counsel, Bob Mueller. And I've written about this, as you have, from the very beginning when Mueller was first appointed. I think it's highly inappropriate and a clear abuse of our judicial system to basically clothe a prosecutor with the law and the mandate to go find a crime. That's basically Mueller's charge. Go find a crime and take as long as you want, spend as much money as you want, look at whoever you want, whatever you want, find a crime. That certainly is not what you did when you were a federal prosecutor, and that certainly was not the way I saw my job and performed my job as the United States Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia. You don't go out and find a crime, and that's basically what we have with Mueller, and it's dragged on for going on 2 years now. I mean, they have some indictments, certainly. It's not hard to indict somebody. There are so many federal crimes. They're so complex and so far-reaching. So that doesn't impress me when they come out with these statistics. Oh, we've indicted 30-something people. I don't find that impressive at all. What I find troubling is we have this individual with a cadre of however many prosecutors with subpoena power out there looking for a crime. I share your concern entirely with that, Larry.
Bob, what do you think about, you've probably observed what's going on in the Senate Intel Committee, the behavior of Senator Richard Burr, the chairman. He seems almost to be in love with Mark Warner, the minority ranking member of that committee. My client, Jerome Corsi, was just subpoenaed to appear there. I'm going to be right back, and we'll talk about that, because this is important for them to understand, our listeners.
And now, 4 words that make corrupt politicians make wee-wee in their little pants.
Transparency and the rule of law will be the touchstones of this presidency.
But we have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Special Prosecutor Larry Klayman.
Be the one who makes our country great again. Go to freedomwatchusa.org and donate.
Bob, I want to pick it up with Senator Richard Burr. I sat in on some of the committee hearings on this so-called Russian collusion investigation, and I couldn't really figure out why a Republican chairman of the committee, of course, I knew in the back of my mind, would be so anti-Trump, would be so friendly with Senator Mark Warner, the Democrat, basically a political hack from Virginia. And, he couldn't take his hands off of Warner. It was really weird. And they want to have my client, Dr. Jerome Corsi, who has been told that unless he lies under oath and accepts what they consider to be at the special counsel's office a sweetheart plea deal where he won't do any time but plead to one count of a perjury charge, that he will be put away, in effect, for life. He's already 72. And, a thorough investigation's been done. All of these documents have been provided to Mueller. In fact, we offered more just in the last few days. And yet you have the Senate Intel Committee bringing Corsi in front of them, asking for the same stuff, wanting to do closed-door testimony, and basically harassing him. How do you explain that, Bob? You've been in Congress. What's going on?
in the Senate, Larry, it's a number of things. One is the culture of the Senate, and I saw this, and you certainly did also, since you were very much involved in trying to bring former President Bill Clinton to justice. We saw during the impeachment trial in the Senate, the most important thing to senators is to be nice, to talk with each other, sometimes interminably. That talk is more important than the substance of what they do. Now, certainly, the Democrats, as we saw during the Kavanaugh hearing last fall, can go off the rails completely, and we've seen that from time to time. We saw that with the Bork and the Clarence Thomas hearings a generation ago, and we saw it just last year. But by and large, and we see this particularly, Larry, on the Intelligence Committee, the primary purpose is to be nice and provide a facade that everybody is getting along, everything is fine. And yet what's going on beneath the surface is using the power, sometimes repetitive power, one committee after another committee, trying to wear a citizen down, wear down a witness, reduce their capability financially and time-wise to continue to defend themselves, in the hopes that they'll cave in and flip on somebody to provide more information for the government so they can then go after somebody else. It's an abuse of not only the prosecutorial system, but it's an abuse of the power that the Congress has.
Well, Bob, why would the Republican chairman, Richard Burr, be part of trying to take down the President of the United States? I mean, that's what he's doing. There's no need for them to keep pushing on if they have such great confidence in Special Counsel Robert Mueller.
It's what you put your finger on just a few minutes ago in our prior segment, Larry, and that is the establishment. The power of the establishment can never be overestimated. It is extremely powerful. The establishment 2 generations ago did everything it could to prevent Ronald Reagan from becoming president, because they knew that by and large they couldn't manipulate him, they couldn't control him. He was independent, and we see it with Trump. The establishment does not like Trump. The swamp is trying to swallow him, and you see that not only with the so-called dark state movement or activity in the executive branch, but in the Congress as well. And they are trying to undermine him, even as they try and present a facade that they are not trying to go after him. They are.
Bob, we take a look at the House of Representatives, where you've had a lot of experience, notwithstanding what Pelosi's been doing this week at trying to thwart the State of the Union message. We have the Republican establishment there run by Kevin McCarthy, who is the minority leader in the House of Representatives. I don't know how this guy, ever came to be the minority leader. This is somebody who, when the House was controlled by Republicans, and in terms of the Benghazi investigation, said publicly to the media that this was just a political attempt to harm Hillary Clinton. I mean, does this guy have an IQ over 50? And this week, I know Steve King. Steve King's not a racist. Perhaps Steve King said something that was taken out of context. They remove his committee ships that he's on. They humiliate him. They basically castrate him. And they eat their own. And this guy looks like he just wants to be, a good guy and get along to go along. What do you know about Kevin McCarthy? And what do you know about what the Republicans are doing in the minority in the House of Representatives today?
Well, what they're doing in the minority, probably it's the same thing they did in the majority. From a substantive standpoint, nothing. But you mentioned Steve King, a friend of mine from western Iowa, and what the Republicans are doing to him is bad enough, what they're doing to him personally, but what they're really doing is they're thumbing their nose at his constituents. They're punishing his constituents, the good men and women, the voters of his district in California, because he said something that they don't like. So they've taken away the ability of a representative elected by the people of his district in Iowa. They've taken away their ability to have their voice heard in the committees, which is, is where most of the work of the Congress gets done. That is important to the people of the district. It's in your committee work and your subcommittee work. It's not just voting on the floor of the House. It's outrageous. It's similar to what the NCAA did to Penn State several years ago. They punished the entire school, the entire football team, for the sins of one or two of the coaches. I thought at the time this is ridiculous to punish the school, which had nothing to do with the alleged offenses by one or two individuals. And here the Congress is doing the exact same thing. They're punishing the constituents in Iowa because their representative, Steve King, said something that the leadership of the Republican Party didn't like. And yet on the other side of the aisle, you have the Muslim American woman from, I forget where her district is, in Michigan somewhere, using the foulest of language, highly inappropriate language publicly, to refer directly to the President of the United States, and nothing happens to her.
Well, and that's notwithstanding the anti-Semitic remarks she's also made, as well as another Muslim congressman. It seems to me, Bob, that if you're a minority these days, I'm in favor of equal rights, I know you are too, that you have more rights than the so-called majority. Of course, whites and others are not going to be the majority much longer. So I think it's important right now that we get an equilibrium here, that everybody's treated the same. But the Republicans run away from anything. They're so afraid of being called racist or anti-minority that they'll literally fall on their own sword and eat their own because they're so afraid of the leftist media branding them as racist. And I'm tired of hearing the term racist. It's lost its meaning anymore. Yeah, there are racists. You have Louis Farrakhan, you have Al Sharpton, you have a bunch of others, but they're not racist, you see. They're just looking forward. They're just trying to perpetrate civil rights as they advocate killing cops and everybody else.
They're progressive, Larry. I love this term. They're progressives. It sounds so positive, so nice, so affirmative. It's outrageous, and it's a problem that goes far beyond simply the Congress and the media. It is a real cultural. It's an undermining of our not just the rule of law, but our basic Western culture, Larry. And it's very, very troubling.
Well, it is. And, of course, now you have a very powerful Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, with her henchmen, her leftist comrades, Gerald Nadler, who you've had experience with him, with Adam Schiff, with Elijah Cummings, with Maxine Waters, the whole band of you-know-whats over there, the people that really want to destroy Trump. I don't want to use, untoward language, but that's how I feel. And you've got a very weak leader of the Republican Party. So how would you deal with Nancy Pelosi and company if you were still in Congress?
Well, there are some tools that the minority can use. There's not a lot they can do because of the power of the chairman and the power that the majority has, if they choose to exercise it, which the Democrats do more than the Republicans, to really get to the bottom of investigations. The Republicans, when they're in power, are very, very hesitant, ridiculously so, to use the subpoena power and certainly to use the contempt power. You had, as you mentioned earlier, in the Benghazi investigation, the Republican leadership couldn't make up its mind which committee it wanted to handle. They had Jason Chaffetz handling it initially, which I think was a good choice, and then they changed and gave it to somebody else, and they cut back the jurisdiction, and then the then Majority Leader McCarthy made statements that undercut the legitimacy of the investigation by indicating that it was political. But what you have to do, and what I would like to see the Republicans do, even though they're in the minority, is come out with a substantive agenda that presents clear differences with the Democrat agenda as being put forward by Nancy Pelosi and the others on her team. thus far, I've seen, maybe you have seen it, but I've seen absolutely nothing coming from the Republican side that is substantive or coherent in any way, shape, or form. So we're still in the situation where the Republicans are failing to truly differentiate themselves from the Democrats. And now the Democrats in the House can wield all the levers of power, and against that you have nothing. What we did have back when I was first elected in 1994, as you remember, was the contract with America that established a very clear, understandable agenda that we stuck to during the campaign and thereafter, and the American people responded both in the 94 election and in supporting us once we took the majority in 1995. It was because we presented a clear, substantive agenda that differed from the Democrats, and it gave us the majority for the first time in 40 years. We don't see that at all right now, or at least I don't, on the Republican side.
Bob, you left the Republican Party. You ran for president as a libertarian. Why did you leave the Republican Party?
The primary reason, Larry, that I did back 10 or 11 years ago was because the Bush administration had so completely undermined respect for our Constitution that I could no longer support it. I think really the straw that broke the camel's back was when the then Attorney General Gonzales testified, I think was before a Senate committee, that the principle of habeas corpus was not enshrined in our Constitution. And that followed, of course, the abuses that we saw with regard to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which you've been fighting for many years. It followed the torture that we saw in Iraq and elsewhere, saying that, well, the law that prohibits that doesn't matter. The international treaty that the Geneva Convention that we're party to doesn't matter. All that matters is that the president says, well, I'm the commander-in-chief, so I can do this. And I just could no longer support a party that displayed utter disregard for the most fundamental underpinnings of not only our constitutional system, but Western civilization, the concept, the principle of habeas corpus, for heaven's sake.
Well, I admire you for that, Bob, and I'm a conservative libertarian. I really no longer consider myself Democrat or Republican as well. I want to thank you for coming on. We're going to have you back again soon, and thank you for everything that you've done for this country. God bless you.
Before he was a trial lawyer, he sliced him and diced him.
People used to ask me, Larry, what caused you to start Judicial Watch and now Freedom Watch, given the powerful forces in this country that put you at risk?
In a meat packing plant.
I'm the son of meat packers in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I know how to slice and dice.
A very special prosecutor, Larry Klayman.
If you'd like to support Freedom Watch and this radio show, go to freedomwatchusa.org.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, fellow patriots, people of goodwill, people of faith, people that believe in something, this is the verdict. Just this week, yet another request for an extension of time was received by me. I'm representing Cliven Bundy. You might remember that his supersedious indictment, along with those concerning his sons and other patriots who stood up using their Second Amendment rights peacefully and legally to an oppressive government then run by the Obama Justice Department, its FBI, the Bureau of Land Management, Harry Reid, all of whom were trying to take the land away from the Bundys, which they had ranched for 150 years, that the government filed an appeal, even after an Obama-appointed judge who was clearly in the camp of the prosecutors dismissed the supersedious indictment on grounds of gross prosecutorial abuse. A whistleblower came forward, Larry Wooten, who showed that there were actually crimes being committed, that the prosecutors in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Nevada were covering that up, that they had lied to the judge. Yet, with all of that, our Justice Department, under Then Attorney General Jeff Sessions filed a notice of appeal. Now, for the third time, they're saying they need more time to evaluate whether they're going forward. Well, they're clearly going forward. This is just because they haven't written the brief that they like so far. But it is an example of what we were just talking about. The Democrat and Republican parties are more than bankrupt. They're behaving by and large in a criminal fashion. They work together. They shake the money tree. They love power. And they're just flip sides of the same coin. They're like the American Football League and the National Football League. They're all part of the same league. Unfortunately, they're not going to the Super Bowl. I think they're all going to wind up going to hell in the end, because we, the American people, need to rise up. Now, I've got another client, Schaefer Cox. Schaefer Cox was referred to me by the Bundys. He's a young guy who uncovered a pedophile human trafficking scheme in Alaska run by, yes, you guessed it again, politicians of both political parties. And when he did, they had to crush him. They had to try to take his kids away from him. And when that didn't work and he stood up to them, he was set up with FBI informants who lied. He was convicted. He was sentenced to 33 years of attempted murder and conspiracy to murder. He did not harm the hair on anybody. Maybe he said a few choice words, but that was it. And you can't be held accountable for words. He was angry. People get angry. And of course, now he's in one of the worst federal prisons ever in Terre Haute, Indiana, built in 1938. It looks like, frankly, a horror show when you drive up to it. I was there a couple of weeks ago. And we're doing our best to free Schaefer Cox. I want you to go to ClivenBundyDefenseFund.org. ClivenBundyDefenseFund.org. Contribute to Cliven's legal defense. We've got a long road to hoe here. And not just with regard to this appeal, but we're challenging the right of the federal government to claim to own the land in Nevada and the other western states, which have driven hundreds of ranchers out of business. That was what gave BLM and the Justice Department the so-called authority to go on Cliven's land and trespass. And I want you to go to freeschaefercox.com and read about his case and also contribute to his legal defense fund. And I want you to go to freedomwatchusa.org because we're handling some matters for both Bundy and Schaefer and contribute there as well. But I want to put this in perspective because you see what happened to the Bundys and what happened to Schaefer Cox can happen to you. And it's about ready to happen again. This ever-powerful federal government, state governments, thinking that they're smarter than everybody else, thinking that they're above the American people, thinking that they're above the law and the Constitution, have wreaked tyranny on the 50 states. And that is why I wrote a column, which you'll find at freedomwatchusa.org and at WND.com this weekend, about the Second Amendment. We have the right to commission militias. We have the right to bear arms. We will do that peacefully and legally. But we're headed into what may be a very destructive, if not bloody, revolution as predicted by Thomas Jefferson. We are not going to start it, but we need to defend ourselves. So I want you to read the Second Amendment, to get ready for the worst, not to start violence, simply to have it there in case you need it to defend yourself. I'll be back next week with another edition of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. Until then, God bless you, God bless America, and God save America.